It is the Resistance Report for Tuesday, June 6th, 2017. We are available by podcast, so download it from iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts. Also, this is live, so be sure to send in your questions. We've got a lot of jokes from yesterday. We're going through them. We will very shortly let you know what the winning joke is. If you've got particularly a favorite joke, one that may involve Donald Trump even. We don't object to Trump jokes. We're going through that as well on the principle that we need to at least maintain a sense of humor even in these dark times. I want to remind you also that the purpose of the Resistance Report is to provide context. It is not just about news. In fact, it really is not primarily about news. You can get your news. It's about what the news means, what it represents, what the connections are between particular pieces of news and facts and developments. So let me just talk about today's theme. Today's theme has to do with American strength and American foreign policy in shambles and why that is the case. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been going around the world over the past few weeks as if he had a kind of giant pooper scooper, and he's scooping up the mess created by his boss everywhere. Yesterday he tried to calm the feud between Saudi Arabia and some of Saudi Arabia's allies on the one hand in the Arab world and Qatar, telling a news conference in Australia that it's important for the Gulf countries to work together. But then early this morning, what did Rex Tillerson's boss, Donald Trump, do? He tweeted. He said, "So good to see the Saudi Arabia visit with the king and 50 countries already paying off. They say they will take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end to the horror of terrorism." Qatar. In other words, Trump not only talked about the feud, he tweeted in a way that made it sound as if he was actually supporting the feud and taking sides against Qatar. So today, what did the Trump administration do? The White House, the State Department, all they did over and over again was to try to say that Trump was not, in fact, taking sides in the deepening dispute in the Middle East. So who is it who speaks for the Trump administration? Well, obviously, Trump speaks for Trump. And with regard to the Trump administration, you have people who are making policy, like Rex Tillerson, or James Mattis, or anybody else, and their policies have little or nothing to do with what Trump says. Do you get it? I mean, you have, on the one side, you have Trump's mouth, and it is loose-lipped, and he's basically saying anything that occurs to him. He has the attention span of a fruit fly. And then on the other hand, you have the cabinet. I have been there in a cabinet. Cabinet members have a lot of responsibility with regard to policy making. Normally, if they're important policies, they check in with the president. I checked in with my president, Bill Clinton, when I reported to Bill Clinton. But here we have a cabinet that is completely out of line with their president, with their boss. Now, how does this fit in with yesterday's arrest of a 25-year-old federal contractor from Atlanta, Georgia? Her name, believe it or not, is Reality Lay Winner. That's her name. I'm not making this up. This is not a reality TV show. It's not fake news. That's her name, Reality Lay Winner. And I don't mean to be disrespectful at all. She was arrested. It appears that Ms. Winner leaked a top-secret 5-page report from the National Security Agency describing the Russian efforts to intrude in the 2016 election with far more specificity than we have heard before. Now, we do know about intelligence reports covering their hacking of the Democratic National Committee, and then leaking what they found. We also know of intelligence reports having to do with Russian operatives releasing bots, that is, millions of messages, real, made-up, complete fake news, into the internet, into the message machines that essentially targeted voters that would be susceptible to those kinds of messages. We don't know how they knew where to target. That is an interesting question. But now we're learning something else from this particular leak, and that is that the Russian operatives actually went right into the local election process. We don't know exactly which elections they were involved in, but we do know, and this was the leak, this is the importance of what came out of the National Security Agency, that days before the election, hackers working for Russian military intelligence hacked at least one U.S. voting software supplier and sent what are called phishing, P-H-I-S-H-I-N-G, emails designed to extract information to more than 100 local election officials at the end of October, beginning of November. Then they used the data they got from that, quote, phishing expedition to create a new email account to launch more phishing, and in fact a phishing campaign targeted at state and local election boards. Now again, these phishing, however you spell it, H-I-S-H-I-N-G, these are designed to elicit responses from people because they look like they are legitimate inquiries, and election officials may very well have given out important information. They then sent test emails to two non-existent accounts ostensibly associated with absentee balloting, presumably with the purpose of creating those accounts to mimic legitimate services. And they obtained and maintained access to elements of multiple state or local electoral boards. Now, this is all according to the National Security Agency report. This is the most damaging and most damning indictment of what Russian officials did, and it is the most direct assault on the core of our democracy, which is our voting process. We need to know how many votes the Russians may have affected, and of course we obviously need to know whether Donald Trump or the Trump aides around him and that campaign knew what was going on and had anything to do with this. Now, the news, though, is all about the leak, because Trump has tried to use leaks as a diversion, a strategy for diverting attention from the underlying reality of what is being leaked, of the message, of the reports that are being leaked. And it's a way of changing the subject, which is particularly ironic, given that the White House just leaks everything. I mean, this is the leakiest White House we have ever witnessed. I have never seen a White House that basically leaks whatever happens. And among the most sensitive leaks about national security from this White House was Donald Trump's himself. It was his Oval Office conversations with top Russian officials last month. You remember that, in which he revealed Allied intelligence information, apparently coming from Israel, and Trump's discussions in the same meeting, about the firing of former FBI Director James Comey one day before that meeting with the Russian intelligence officials. That provides evidence of Trump's intent to obstruct justice. That's going to be the subject of Thursday's hearing when James Comey goes up before Congress to talk about what he knows. And irony of ironies, all of this, that is what Trump said to the Russian officials. I mean, how many people could there be have been in that room, in the Oval Office? I mean, the Oval Office is not that huge. It's actually quite modest relative to what you would imagine a ballroom or a big chief executive's office. It's an oval, sort of moderately sized oval office. How many people were there in that meeting with the Russians? All of what I've just said was leaked to the press. I mean, there must have been, how many? A handful of aides? They leaked. So we have Trump leaking intelligence to the Russians directly, and then a leak about Trump leaking intelligence, and then a leak about Trump talking about Comey, who is now going to talk about what Trump might have done in terms of obstructing justice. And so, in the midst of all of this, to single out one 25-year-old who leaked some information from a National Security Agency report, I'm not suggesting that she was right. It just, let me just say this. The real message of the Justice Department's decision to go after Reality Winner, great name, is that leakers will be particularly targeted if the intelligence they give to journalists suggests that Russia helped Trump win the election. That is the bottom line. All right? You got leaks in every direction, leaks coming out of everywhere, but if you are an intelligence official or contractor and you know something, or you have in your possession something that suggests that, in fact, explains how Russia helped Trump win the election, you are in danger. This leak is not our big problem, folks. Can I just be clear with you about that? This leak is not our big problem. The real problem is we have a hostile foreign power who directly interfered in the most sacred aspect of our democracy, which is our voting processes, and instead of resolutely focusing on that and determining to do something about it, we have a president who is loose-lipped and who's trying to obstruct public knowledge of what actually happened. That is the problem. Can we be clear about that? That is the problem. Now, one final point with regard to knitting together these various strands. The core of American intelligence, the core of American defense, is not the intelligence agencies. The core of the strength of America in terms of our place in the world is our intelligence. Again, not our intelligence agencies, it's the intelligence of Americans. That's how we stay strong. Economically, that's how we stay innovative. We have a well-educated America. But Trump wants to expand the military budget by 10%. At the same time, he is, in his budget, he's whacking the education department's budget by 13%. Now today, Betsy DeVos, our education secretary, Trump's education secretary, went to Capitol Hill to defend this absurd 13% cut. And here's what she said. In response to questions from members of Congress, Betsy DeVos said she would allow public money to go to not only to private schools, but also to for-profit private schools, enriching their owners, taxpayer money, to for-profit private schools. She also said that if those private for-profit schools, or even any private school, discriminates against LGBTQ or any other students, well, she's not going to protect those students from that kind of discrimination. So we have an education secretary bent on undermining our system of public education, which will do more to weaken America than anything else the Trump administration is contemplating. We have a foreign policy in absolute shambles. We have a Secretary of State running around the world with a pooper scooper trying to clean up the mess that Donald Trump makes every single day. We have leaks galore. We have a Justice Department going after a leaker who is trying to help Americans understand what actually the Russians have been doing or had done in 2016 and may do again if we don't understand better what they did do in terms of interrupting and interfering directly in our voting processes. And we have, on top of that, a commitment by the Trump administration, Betsy DeVos, to erode public education. Now, this is not, none of this is making America great again. It's endangering our future. And your questions. This is Anne-Marie Barton. Shouldn't it be illegal for members of Congress who will be asking questions to Comey to be eating dinner with Trump in a private setting? Anne-Marie, there's no way we can in any way control, nor necessarily should we control, members of Congress who want to sit down and eat dinner with the President of the United States. I mean, there are conflicts of interest all over the place, but I assure you that if Comey on Thursday says something incriminating about Donald Trump in terms of obstruction of justice, those members of Congress who are eating dinner with him are going to be less eager to accept a dinner invitation in the future, because Donald Trump is going to become an albatross around their necks in 2018. A lot of this that's going on, a lot of this drama, comes to a head in the midterm elections. That's what we all need to be focusing on. That's why we need to make sure that Congress is flipped, or the Republicans who are there are willing to take Trump on and even entertain an impeachment for obstruction of justice or for many other things we've talked about. The Emoluments Clause. Riley Hammonds, what are your thoughts on the supposed rift between President Trump and Attorney General Sessions? Do you think he will be replaced? And if so, who do you think is first in line for the job? Riley, my only thought is this. Donald Trump doesn't like anybody who in any way makes him look bad or stands up to him. And the moment that Jeff Sessions said that he was recusing himself from the FBI investigation right after he became Attorney General, Trump was furious. That was the beginning of the end of Jeff Sessions. I mean, Trump basically cut him off. According to leaked sources from the White House, Trump has almost daily expressed rage about Jeff Sessions. And he's going after the Justice Department again with regard to the second executive order that was issued with regard to the Muslim travel ban. He says it's watered down, politically correct. And Donald Trump is actually undermining the appeal that he wants the Justice Department to make to the Supreme Court. I mean, he is his own worst enemy. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Sessions left on his own accord. I mean, can you imagine being an attorney general for a president that is going behind your back and even publicly repudiating you and at the same time undercutting what you are supposed to be doing? Who's going to replace Jeff Sessions? Well, it will be somebody that will be a toady of Donald Trump. And if we have enough people in Congress, Republicans in the Senate, who know that they have got to have backbone and learn by now that they need backbone to stand up to this complete monster of a child, then that toady may not get confirmed. Susanna Agallo, if by some miracle California enacts SB 562, that's the single-payer health care, I don't think it's going to be some miracle, Susanna. I think there is a chance. Can it be funded without federal dollars, and will it require federal permission of any kind? Well, my understanding, it's going to be about $400 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but a lot of that's going to be savings, where it will be offset by savings with regard to businesses and individuals who will not be have to pay all that much money for their health insurance. So that sticker shock, yes, that's one thing, but you have to, in terms of understanding it, you've got to understand that a single-payer system ultimately saves us all a lot of money. And how is it going to be designed? I don't know specifically. I have not yet seen. I'm not sure the specifics are there. Will the feds have to give us, that is Californians, permission? I don't think so. Now, under the Affordable Care Act, states can get waivers. What's going to be the replacement for the Affordable Care Act? I have no idea. The Republicans in the Senate are rewriting it entirely on their own, and nobody knows what they're going to come up with. I frankly don't think they're going to come up with anything, because it's impossible for them to square the circle. They want to get rid of the taxes that are supporting all of the 80% of people who are getting subsidized under the Affordable Care Act, and they also want to get rid of the mandate requiring younger and healthier people, especially, to get health insurance, which is necessary if the people who have pre-existing conditions are going to have support and not be priced out of the entire healthcare market. So what are the Republicans going to do? They're not going to come up with anything that is respectable. I mean, that it's not going to throw millions of people off healthcare. David Okami, I think this is the last one. We have two more. David Okami, I would welcome a discussion on the perils of privatization. For example, our prison system and so on, to Donald Trump's current wish to privatize air traffic controllers. How dangerous would that be? David, there are certain things that can be private. If by privatization we mean we turn it over to private contractors who are making a profit, well, a lot of what other countries do is privatized in the United States, healthcare and health insurance being the prime examples. The problem is that if you turn over something to private contractors and you don't know exactly and have no way of telling what they are doing, there's no quality control. Like prison contractors. I mean, prisoners are not going to complain. They're not in a position to complain. Most of us, 99% of the public, has no idea what happens inside prisons. That is the worst situation for contractors, for for-profit contractors to come in, because there's absolutely no quality control and there's no competition. I mean, who's going to change to another contractor on the basis of poor quality? You can't do that. Another problem is air traffic controllers, because you don't know that air traffic... what quality control do you have? How do you know that air traffic controllers are doing their jobs? Now, you have a third big problem with regard to privatization, and that is Donald Trump. What he wants to do, essentially, we have a video about this, and it's on this page. I hope you go to it. But what Donald Trump essentially wants to do is charge all of us twice for a lot of infrastructure. That is, as taxpayers, we're going to be charged because he wants to give investors, private investors who invest in infrastructure, huge tax benefits, huge write-offs, tax credits, and so forth. We got to make it up as taxpayers, because it's going to leave a big hole in the budget. And then he wants to give those private investors, on top of those tax credits, he wants to give them the ability and right to charge tolls and fees on major highways and waterways and bridges and everything else, which we are also going to be paying. So we pay double. This is a lousy idea. This is a sham. You know, everybody talks up, this is great, we can do this. No, we ought to finance our infrastructure the way we have always financed infrastructure, and we ought to make sure that particularly the wealthiest among us pay their fair share for infrastructure. And don't, a lot of conservatives say, oh, well, the wealthy are paying all the income taxes. That is absolute baloney. The wealthy are not paying all the income taxes. If you look at Social Security taxes and state sales taxes and property taxes and everything else, look at total taxation, actually the wealthy are paying a smaller share of their total earnings now than they did 50 years ago. They ought to pay more, and they ought to pay more because they're part of our society, and they're earning more than anybody else, and they're earning more than they've ever earned. Joe Kuhn, I think this is the last one. Joe Kuhn, it seems to me that the only way any real changes can be made is to reform campaign financing. I agree with you, Joe. Will it really take an amendment to the Constitution to realize that? Is there any hope that Congresspersons will ever have any incentive or reason to change the way they rake in money? Joe, first of all, I want to give you, and I want to end on an optimistic note. And here's the optimistic note. Changing the Constitution is very hard, and that's not a bad thing. We don't want the Constitution easily changed, and certainly we don't want an Article 5 convention. Some people want an Article 5 convention, particularly conservatives, because they want a balanced budget amendment, and they want to end the ability of women to have abortions after the first, or in the first trimester, after the first trimester, and before the first trimester. And I think that conservative push on Article 5 is really, really dangerous. But there are things that we can do. We can have public financing of elections. Certain states are already doing that. We can do that consistent with Citizens United. We can also end the revolving door between government and business. We can have full disclosure and require full disclosure of every cent of where every dollar is coming from, either for or against people in campaigns. And I could give you a long list. We can do it even with Citizens United there. Will Congress ever support these things? Well, yes, they will, because they supported major campaign finance changes and major campaign finance reforms in the late 1970s. That was the last big reform wave, and they did that partly in response to Watergate. And so public support is growing for that kind of change. People want to get big money out of politics. I hear it not just from liberals and progressives. I hear it from conservatives. I hear it from people who are libertarians. I say on the hustings, we've got to get big money out of politics, and it is an applause line even in places in this country where you would not expect people to be concerned about it. So I think it is coming, notwithstanding Citizens United, and I would not be surprised by the same token if the Supreme Court overruled Citizens United sometime in the next few years, even with Neil Gorsuch there. And so on that positive note, I want to thank our producer, Yael Bridge, and also associate producer, Sasha Leitman. I want to just thank all of you for continuing to fight, and you have to continue to fight for your citizen activism. This is going to be a long fight. It is going to stretch on for many years. It's not just Donald Trump. So thank you for what you are doing. Thank you for what you will do. And I will see you very soon.